Hello everyone, welcome to the monthly NRHS Iowa Chapter YouTube slideshow. If you're interested in more information about the Iowa Chapter, please visit iowanrhs.com. There you can join the chapter or renew your membership and order any of the great products that the Iowa Chapter has to offer, including DVDs and photo collections. Please enjoy the program this month and consider visiting iowanrhs.com. Hello everyone, welcome to the October 2022 Iowa Chapter and Cedar Rapids Railfans slideshow. This month we have a presentation from Edward Koehler of New York. He's going to share with us some slides, images that he took of a trip to southeast Iowa. So thank you, Edward, for the presentation, and let's get this kicked off. All right, go ahead with the program, Edward.
Hey, how and why did this show come about? I've been working on a project to photograph Denver and Rio Grande Western narrow gauge equipment that was still working on other lines. Another project had me running down trolleys that once ran at the McGee Trolley Museum. Finally, I've begun to appreciate preserved and operating steam tractors. This led me to the Midwest Old Threshers 2019 reunion in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, where I could check off all three of the boxes on the previous slide. The wit?
That is an impressive piece of machinery.
While there in 2019, I stopped at the railroad stations in Burlington and Mount Pleasant and took pictures of those structures. When I started to assemble my photographs into a cogent collection back home, I realized that while I had covered some of the reunion very well, my material was lacking in other areas. The COVID-19 pandemic put an end to a repeat trip in 2020. But the reunion was on for 2021. I scheduled an extra day to chase down the railroads in the area. Then in both March and June 2022, I went back to finish up by taking a few more photographs over 2-3-day periods. And here's our title, Ed Koehler's A Slice of Southeast Iowa Railroads. Before we begin, I must thank the following for their contributions. Reverend Doug Harding, David Kroger, the Winfield Historical Society and Museum, Michael Uhas, and the gentleman who's helping me record this today. And he'll wave his hand to you all.
Well, nobody can see me, but yes, thank you.
You're welcome. I should have really added your name there.
That's all right.
The very busy rail map of Iowa from 1900 to 2016. Our area is highlighted in yellow. A close-up of the area. Basically, it's the area surrounding Henry County, Iowa. This presentation will not be covering the Muscatine North and South Railroad. Even though it ran through the area, there's nothing left. Also, the CB&Q branch from Bloomfield to Fort Madison will not be visited. And the reason that's not covered is almost a stupid reason on my part. I worked on it using the Ottumwa subdivision employee timetables, and that was part of the Centerville division. So, bad on me.
Hey, I would offer you one little piece of information. There
Sure.
is a very short stretch of the MB&S that still exists in Muscatine. And,
Owned by, I think, Union Pacific.
Canadian Pacific, yes.
Canadian Pacific, okay.
Yes, it was inherited from them from multiple mergers, but there's actually a section of track in Muscatine that is identified as the MB&S Main.
I am aware of that.
Yeah,
But, I'm working the area a little further south.
right.
So, a predecessor of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy opened service to Gulfport on the east bank of the Mississippi River opposite Burlington, Iowa on March 17, 1855. A train ferry would eventually link the Illinois and Iowa sides of the river. The current Mississippi River Bridge was built by the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Personally, bridges look a lot better to me when there's a train on them. And this one happens to be the California Zephyr.
I agree.
The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy built the Burlington Station during 1943 to replace a building lost to a fire. Amtrak initially used the former Burlington Station, but built a new structure adjacent to it a few years later. The 1943 station remained with a few Burlington Northern offices in it. The city of Burlington would purchase the 1943 station and got Amtrak to move back into a portion of it. The Burlington Northern Santa Fe would then move their offices into the former short-lived Amtrak station. And here's a BNSF office in Burlington, the former Amtrak station. CB&Q Hudson 3003 on display in Burlington. Burlington, Cedar Falls, and Northern Railroad opened the main line north out of Burlington, Iowa to Albert Lee, Minnesota via Cedar Rapids, Iowa during 1876. It became a part of the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad during 1903. This map shows the southern portion of the Burlington, Cedar Falls, and Northern in orange, outlined in yellow. The blue line to the right of the highlighted is the Muscatine North and South Railroad. And we'll talk about that pink stripe going across the center of the map in a little bit. That's basically the northern border of what we're covering.
All right.
And here's an employee's timetable. No, excuse me. This is a public passenger timetable for the former Burlington, Cedar Falls, and Northern or Rock Island line from Wapello, Iowa to the Burlington Union Station. The Burlington, Cedar Falls, and Northern Rock Island Freight House in Burlington survives as a restaurant, although it was changing ownership the time I was there in 2019 and photographed it. The relocated and modified former Rock Island Station in Morning Sun partially survives, in rather poor condition, I might add.
I would have to agree.
Yeah, but at least it's still standing.
Yes.
The former the former Burlington, Cedar Falls, and Northern trackage in this area was still intact when the Rock Island shut down on March 31st, 1980, but it was not in service. The employee's timetable effective March 18th, 1979 showed CRI&P service into Burlington running over the Burlington Northern from Keokuk.
Hey, I do have one thing to offer you here. You have BCF and N. It's BCR and N. Burlington, Cedar Rapids, and Northern.
I had it as Cedar Falls.
Yeah.
That's a problem, but I guess we can't change it now.
Nope, just keep going. Just wanted to offer you a clarification there. BCR and N.
Yeah. Burlington Northern offered limited service from Burlington to Minneapolis until May 21st, 1982. Service ended due to storm damage to the track. The Burlington and Northwestern narrow gauge railroad, a 3-foot gauge line, extended from Minneapolis to Washington, Iowa. Incorporated during 1875, its tracks reached Washington in 1880. The line had trackage rights by laying a third rail over the BCF and N from Minneapolis to Burlington. The Burlington and Northwestern was acquired by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy circa 1880, but remained nominally independent. On June 20th, 1902, this line was widened to standard gauge, and in 1903, it was deeded to the CB&Q. Minneapolis to Washington was abandoned by the Burlington Northern on September 1st, 1980. And we have a public timetable for the trackage between Burlington and Washington here. We don't detail the trackage rights over the Rock Island, though. The Washington line is shown in orange, outlined with yellow on this map. Let's take a look at a few of the stations. The Armament Station has been relocated to the Midwest Old Threshers in Mount Pleasant and is a very busy station for about 5 days of the year.
Yeah, nice looking building.
Yes, it is. The rail side of the former CB&Q Winfield Station. This looked like it was a nice looking building at one time too.
I agree. It looks like it was actually built to passenger specifications.
Yes, it does. The CB&Q station building from Washington survives, relocated to the Washington County Fairgrounds. And based on where that door is on this building, this is the track side of this structure. The Burlington and Western, a 3-foot gauge subsidiary of the CB&Q, was formed during 1881 to complete a branch line off of the Burlington and Northwestern from Winfield to Oskaloosa. The 71-mile line opened during 1882, paralleling the Iowa Central Railroad, later the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad. The Burlington and Western was standard gauge on June 20th, 1902, and deeded to the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy during 1903. This trackage crossed the Minneapolis and St. Louis no less than 5 times. Abandoned on August 1st, 1934, 35 miles of the track were sold to the Minneapolis and St. Louis during 1934. The Minneapolis and St. Louis and CB&Q trackage was combined into one line. And here is a public timetable for the Burlington and Western line from Winfield, where it connected to the Burlington-Washington subdivision, to Oskaloosa, where it connected to lines diverging. None of the former Burlington route stations between Winfield and Oskaloosa have survived to the present day. The Chicago, Burlington, and Pacific Railroad constructed a rail line through Winfield from Oskaloosa to the Mississippi River opposite Keithburg, Illinois in 1882, and became the Central Iowa Railroad during 1882. During 1888, the line was renamed the Iowa Central Railroad and is extended eastward to Peoria, Illinois. The Iowa Central Railroad was acquired by the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad in 1914, having leased it since 1901. The Minneapolis and St. Louis began the operation of daily scheduled freights from St. Paul, Minnesota to Peoria, Illinois, which avoided Chicago interchange delays. Long a thorn in the side of the Chicago lines, the Minneapolis and St. Louis is finally acquired by the Chicago and Northwestern on November 1st, 1960. The Peoria Gateway route is abandoned as of November 4th, 1971. The Minneapolis and St. Louis trackage is shown in this map, highlighted in yellow. Note the paralleling CB&Q branch beyond Washington, which was purchased in 1934. And this basically is also the northern boundary of the area we're discussing today.
Yeah. And you know, I do know that the M and St. L did a lot of marketing based on that Peoria Gateway route.
Absolutely. Like I said, they were a thorn in the side of the Chicago lines. And here's the employees' timetable for Minneapolis, St. Louis, Eastern Division from Oskaloosa to Keithburg, Iowa. An ABA set of EMD model FTs in the pre-1955 colors of the Minneapolis and St. Louis, with also their original diesel numbering scheme prominently displayed.
Yeah.
Union Pacific has recently demolished the circa 1951 Minneapolis and St. Louis engine shed in Oskaloosa that stood there until a few years ago. The arrow points to where the building would have been seen. The relocated Hedrick Station was joint with the Milwaukee Road. The upper floor was an interlocking tower. The windows have been covered over. The former Marsh Station has been relocated to a farm near Winfield. The Milwaukee Road completed their main line from Savannah, Illinois to Council Bluffs, Iowa during 1882. This would be the line that would serve Kansas City. The surviving portions of the Milwaukee Road were merged into the Sioux Line on January 1st, 1986. The Canadian Pacific had long held stock control over the Sioux Line. It was reduced to a paper railroad in the 2000s. The northern border of the area we're looking at is set by the former Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific line to Kansas City. Now, let me point out that the line between Washington which is right here, and right around Letts is a former Rock Island. It's the former Rock Island Golden State Line, which the Milwaukee Road purchased after the Rock Island shut down.
Right. That was all the way up to a spot called Culver Tower in Muscatine.
Okay, but that's off the map, so.
Yeah, just a little bit north of your area. I think
Yeah.
it also bears pointing out that at Savannah, that's actually where just on the Iowa side, that's where the Milwaukee Road split. And the route going to Kansas City, this that you're looking at, was a little bit separate from the route you were talking about that went to Council Bluffs.
Yeah, okay. The venerable Milwaukee Road is now operated by the Canadian Pacific. It's the black line highlighted by yellow. And remember, I'm a New Yorker, so this is foreign,
right.
very foreign territory for me.
I know. I'm just trying to offer help where I can.
I hear you. And here's a Milwaukee Road employees timetable from 1982 for the Southern Division, showing a portion of the 5th subdivision from Savannah, Illinois to Ottumwa, Iowa.
Yep.
And with a little bit of stuff edited out between Savannah and Letts. The Milwaukee Road Rock Island Interlocking Tower from Washington is now at the Midwest Old Threshers. Now, I'm going to tell you a funny story about this. The Railroad Station Historical Society can't figure out if this is a water tower or an interlocking tower. So in the absence of their doing further research, they list it twice. Once as a water tower and once as an interlocking tower.
Yeah.
The Canadian Pacific has replaced the Milwaukee Road Station in Washington with this modest structure. In Rubio, the community moved the station into a trackside park for use as a community center. Hedrick Station, which we've seen before, or at least the other side of it, joint with the Minneapolis and St. Louis on a Milwaukee Road branch out of Ottumwa. I should point out that this is a V-shaped building and has a gap between the two wings if we photographed it from the back.
Yeah, the two railroads literally went along the different sides of the station there.
Absolutely. Looking east at Lawler, where the Milwaukee Road crosses the Burlington in Ottumwa. The Milwaukee Road originally served the downtown Ottumwa station via a spur from their main line. This facility was located at Jefferson Street and was also served by the Wabash. The approximate site of the Milwaukee Wabash station in Ottumwa, Jefferson Street, is now on the viaduct. And that circular canvas-covered building you see in the distance under the Jefferson Street viaduct, that's owned by the Burlington Junction Railway. We'll get back to that later in the presentation.
Yeah.
The Wabash reached the Milwaukee Road Station via this bridge across the Des Moines River. The Wabash Bridge is now part of the local trail system, but it's also a place where eagles nest, so it was closed the day I was there. I was hoping to get some eagle pornography to add to my collection.
Interesting.
Yeah, the Milwaukee Road moved their station to the west side of the town during the 1950s. Platform in the foreground once entertained the Southwest Limited. Looking west from the former Ottumwa station site. The Milwaukee Road Yard Office in Ottumwa. This is on the north side of the tracks. The Canadian Pacific added this building on the south side of the tracks in Ottumwa.
Yeah, it's actually very close to the location of the original brick building that was there until a few years ago.
Yeah, and by the way, I double-checked that with a guy who was a train master in this area for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have any relevant Canadian Pacific train action at this point. Let's go back to Lawler for a moment. This elevated metal structure houses the interlocking equipment for the Lawler crossing. The BNSF coal train is approaching the diamond. In large, we have BNSF 9222 and 8457 on the head end of a Powder River coal train about to cross the Canadian Pacific, near Milwaukee. Here's the 9222 and the 8457 and a little closer. The lead locomotive, 9222, is an SD70 ACE And serial number, oh God, that's a lot of numbers.
Yeah,
Built
it
in
is.
between 4 and 9, 2008. The second unit is also an SD70 ACE, built in between July and October 2014. It's probably the newest locomotive you're going to see in this presentation.
Yeah.
This coal train was going to the Consumers Energy Company of Jackson, Michigan, based on the ownership of this and other hopper cars in the consist. As the rear of the train approaches, the distributed power unit comes into view. DPU, Burlington Northern Santa Fe 6081, is an ES44AC, and we're looking southwest at it. And we're now looking east at the radiator end of the locomotive. The Ottumwa station of the Burlington was also used by the Rock Island. Starting in 1853, the Keokuk, Fort Des Moines, and Minnesota Railroad Company began the work of connecting Keokuk on the Mississippi River with Des Moines in the center of the state. This work was done in 1866. By 1880, the KD line, as it was called, became the KD division of the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific. This line would remain in service until the Rock Island was shut down on March 31st, 1980. The former Rock Island KD division is highlighted in yellow, all the way from Oskaloosa down to Keokuk. And here's the only system employee timetable ever issued by the Rock Island, number 1 of March 18th, 1979. Here's the KD. Here's a portion of the KD line between Farmington, which is the southern end because they don't go to Keokuk anymore, and Altoona.
Yeah, they had a washout on the south end of that KD line, and at some point, they used BN trackage rights to get into their customers in Keokuk.
Yeah.
From Burlington, I believe.
Yes, they did. Okay, Oskaloosa was connected to the KD line via subdivision 4D. About 3 blocks from the Rock Island Station is the former car barn of the Oskaloosa and Beacon Electric Railway. It's now used by the local electric utility company. We have a lot to see in Eldon when we view the Golden State route. For now, let's settle for the Rock Island bunkhouse aligned to the KD division. At Dowds, the station has been moved back from the tracks and placed in a park. Keokuk Union Depot dates from 1890, 1891, southern terminal of the KD line. It's currently owned by the city and it's being renovated as a venue for weddings, receptions, etc. I think the community has to talk to the Keokuk Junction Railway about what particular cars they'll be putting on the station track when they're having an event there.
Yeah, we actually just had an Iowa chapter meet there in Keokuk in April and got to see the inside of the building. It's really nicely restored.
Yes, they were working on it when I was there in June. It was unbelievable. The Keokuk Union Depot was used by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, the Chicago, Rock Island, Pacific, and the Wabash. The Toledo, Peoria, and Western came into the adjacent Keokuk yard but did not use the passenger station. Today, the yard is served by the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, the Norfolk Southern, and the Keokuk Junction. The Chicago, Rock Island, Pacific would open a 271-mile-long line from Washington, Iowa to Leavenworth and Atchison in Kansas via Fairfield, Iowa during 1872. Eventually reaching Tucumcari, New Mexico, where it would connect with the Southern Pacific Railroad, forming the Golden State route. Much of this route would be rebuilt and realigned during the 1940s and 1950s. The Golden State route is outlined in yellow here. From Washington to, to the left of the map, let's just say. And here it's from our faithful employee timetable. We have the trackage from Ainsworth, Iowa to Eldon Yard. The original Rock Island Station in Washington. The the Rock Island's original freight house in Washington. Those tracks in front are now owned by the Canadian Pacific. And the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Freight Office and Scale House on the original line in Washington. A new Golden State line was built in the late 1940s, early 1950s through Washington, Iowa. A new station located south of the town was built. Supposedly it survived, relocated, and rebuilt, but I couldn't find it on a visit to that community.
I think you might be talking about the station in Brighton, possibly.
There's that one. I'm not aware of one in Brighton.
Yeah, that was where the line was relocated. It was relocated out of Washington into Brighton. Yep, that might be what you're thinking of.
Yeah, the Railroad Station Historical Society doesn't have Brighton on their list. I'll have to go back and look if I ever get back there.
Yeah,
my wife is upset about me getting back there.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, the Rock Island Station in Fairfield. This is the track side. It's it's a 2-day drive just to get to the area. A gentleman has set up a used rail equipment business in Fairfield called the Rail Yard. A former Missouri Pacific transfer caboose and some heavyweight Pullmans were there in 2019. The modern Libertyville station was moved to Eldon and heavily rebuilt. It's there in that house somewhere.
Yeah.
The next station was Eldon. Well, I knew there was a small railroad museum there. I didn't realize the rail heritage of the community. The bunkhouse at a strange angle to the Golden State route led me to Sanborn fire insurance maps on the internet and an interesting discovery. Now, here's the Sanborn map of Eldon, Iowa from circa 1900. We got the roundhouse, we got the turntable. There's the railroad station and the platform on the east side of the KD line, which goes north and south. Cut off the map here is a huge freight house. And here's the Eldon Yard and your locomotive coaling station right next to the Golden State route. This is circa 1900. Circa 2002, Eldon, Iowa from Google Maps. A lot is different. Here's where the roundhouse was. This is the Golden State route right here. Off picture down here is the bunkhouse, and the KD line went north and south through this picture. Well, let's look around Eldon. Eldon got a new station during the 1940s and 1950s rebuild of the Golden State route. Eldon lost its roundhouse during this period, but it remained a crew change point, hence the construction of a bunkhouse where the big freight house had been. After the shutdown of the Rock Island on March 31st, 1980, a local Eldon resident pushed for the creation of a railroad museum. It happened in 2001. This is a mural featuring a Rock Island Model TA, and the Golden State rocket train is adjacent to the station building. This was one of 4 such trains. In August 2015, a former Santa Fe chopped-nosed GP7 was acquired for display. The real Rock Island 1275 is working for an industry up in Minnesota, based on my research. Flat car 91333 appears to have come from the Rock Island. It's just too old and grungy to have any other history. The short display freight train is followed by a caboose not of Rock Island heritage. It was originally built for the Alton, but it was completely rebuilt in Illinois Central Gulf days. Oh, and the number on that is the zip code for Eldon, Iowa. Looking west towards the Des Moines River Bridge at Eldon. Looking west over the piers of the Des Moines River at Eldon. And another view of the remains of the Rock Island Bridge at Eldon. 749 miles to Tucumcari, New Mexico. Let's go back to Ottumwa to start our next segment. Chicago, Fort Madison, and Des Moines Railroad, known as the Peavine, built a 3-foot gauge branch line from Fort Madison to Birmingham in 1881. Later, it was extended northwest towards Ottumwa meeting the main line of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy at Batavia. The line was widened to standard gauge during 1891 and became a part of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy during 1901. Peavine trains usually traveled the 14 miles over the main line into Ottumwa after becoming a part of the CB&Q. The first segment of the Peavine to be abandoned was Batavia to Binghamton on November 12, 1939, Binghamton to Stockport on June 14, 1956, and Stockport to Fort Madison as of May 8, 1980. A map of the Peavine, it is highlighted in yellow. And here's the employees' timetable from the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, July 18, 1943, from Fort Madison to Birmingham. And we'll talk about Mertensville in a few moments. It was rather interesting there. And beyond Binghamton to Batavia for the remainder of the line, from public timetable of 1923. Stockport, the depot is now a community museum. The Hillsborough station had been moved to the Midwest Old Thresher grounds and serves their narrow gauge. The covered waiting area, seen in the right, was added to the station after it arrived at the Old Thresher's grounds, but it's been very faithfully matched to the original station building. Pilot Grove Station has been moved to New London and is part of the Dover Museum there. The only other surviving building on the Peavine is the 1898 building at Fort Madison. It's really on the K line to St. Louis. And very hard to photograph because of fences and angles and topographical changes. The CB&Q station is now a railroad museum. Adjacent to the CB&Q building is the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Fort Madison Station Complex. This is the passenger station which served from 1910 to 1968, and again from 2021 after it had been raised because of flood issues. The Circa 1922 Santa Fe Fort Madison Freight House is just south of the passenger station. It also housed the Railway Express Agency. The Santa Fe built these division offices in Fort Madison during 1936, adjacent to the freight house. From 1968 until 2021, this was the passenger station in Fort Madison. Today it is the BNSF yard office. Amtrak Train 4, the Southwest Chief, changing crews at Fort Madison. It's usually a 7-car train behind 2 locomotives. It's almost the same consist as the California Zephyr, which we'll see later in this presentation, except on the Southwest Chief, the coaches are up front and the sleepers are in the rear. And on the California Zephyr, the sleepers are up front and the sleepers and the coaches change directions. We'll just say it that way.
Yes.
Change ends. Service completed, Train 4 heads out on the last leg to Chicago. BNSF Extra 5076, my designation, not the BN's, led by a C-44-9W heads south towards St. Louis through the station. The distributed power unit on the rear, the 7351, an ES-44DC. The Keokuk, Mount Pleasant, and Northern Railroad Company's first train between Mount Pleasant and Keokuk ran on January 29, 1881. It was consolidated with the Keokuk and Northwestern Railroad Company as of February 11, 1881. The company was purchased by the CB&Q during 1899. It was merged into the larger road during 1902. Permission was given to abandon this line on January 26, 1932, the last train running that same day. The exception to the 1932 abandonment was 1 mile south from Mertensville to Hamel and 5 8/10 mile north from Mertensville to Salem via Houghton. The 3 stations on these 2 spurs were served daily by the Peavine mixed train until it was discontinued. The spurs were abandoned with the Peavine in 1980. The Keokuk branch began in Mount Pleasant, crossed the Peavine, and connected to the K line at Keokuk. It is outlined here in yellow. And here's the public timetable from April 1923 for the Keokuk Mount Pleasant segment of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. The CB&Q's second station in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, at the north end of the branch. It's now used by Amtrak. Now relocated, the Hamel Station was near the Peavine Line Junction. Donaldson, where the line from Bloomfield to Fort Madison crossed. We find ourselves again at the Keokuk Union Depot. I love the curved roof of that station shelter.
Yeah, it's
Doesn't match
iconic, honestly.
Doesn't match the building architecture at all, but it looks lovely.
Mm-hmm.
The Toledo, Peoria, and Western office in Keokuk, much more modern building. And north from the office is the TP&W's Mississippi River Swing Bridge. Switching the yard in Keokuk is part of the duties of the Keokuk Junction Railway, part of the Pioneer Rail Corp organization. Keokuk Junction also operates over the former Toledo, Peoria, and Western into the city via the Mississippi River Bridge. At first, I thought a few covered hoppers would be the only Keokuk Junction Railway rolling stock that I would get images of. Then Pioneer Rail Corp 4101, which had run into the nearby chemical plant as I drove up, came out into the yard. Pioneer Rail Corp 4101, which is a EMD Serial A1253 of June 1957, was Canadian National 4601, a GP9, renumbered to 4101 when it was rebuilt as a GP9RM. Closer view of Pioneer Rail Corp 4101. And PREX 4101 tied up near the BNSF office building. And oh yes, the CN Wet Noodle logo is still on the high hood end of this locomotive.
Yeah.
The BNSF office in Keokuk, Iowa. BNSFX Extra 2777, a local freight. Again, that's my designation, not the BN's. A local freight with 3 units comes through the Keokuk yard. The lead unit, 2777, was built in February 1975 as a GP 39-2 for the Santa Fe. It is now a GP 39-3. The second unit, 3194, from April 1981, was a GP 50 for the 8 Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. The third unit, 2816, was built in April 1963 as a GP 39 for the Great Northern. Quite an interesting mix. The local freight which we are viewing works between West Quincy, Illinois, and Louisiana, Missouri. Because of the cargoes carried, it utilizes an old caboose as a barrier car behind the locomotives. Burlington Northern Caboose 12523 on the consist of Extra 2777 North. Burlington Northern Caboose 12523 was built by Pacific Car and Foundry in 1980 as Fort Worth and Denver 188, becoming Burlington Northern 11788 as a result of a merger after December 31st, 1982. This car was rebuilt during 1990 and was renumbered to the present 12523. Ignoring Keokuk and Fort Madison, we'll finally look at the active major railroad in this area around Henry County, Iowa. The predecessor of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy reached Gulfport, Illinois, opposite Burlington, Iowa, on March 17, 1855. The Burlington and Missouri River built west from Burlington, Iowa, reaching the Skunk River Bridge at Rome, Iowa during 1857, opening service to Fairfield, Iowa on September 1st, 1858, and Ottumwa during 1859. The first CB&Q bridge over the Mississippi linking Gulfport, Illinois, and Burlington, Iowa was opened during 1868, replacing a train ferry. Burlington and Missouri River, through a subsidiary, reached Lincoln, Nebraska in 1870. It was absorbed into the CB&Q during 1882, the same year the line reached Denver. The line is host to Amtrak's California Zephyr. When the Powder River Coal Train traffic began, it had about 45 unit trains a day. Environmental changes has reduced these to about 15 trains a day. There is also a merchandise train and a local freight. Note the freight train designations are my own shorthand and not the BNSF identifiers. The former CB&Q main line, now part of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, is highlighted in yellow. And here's the Burlington Northern Railroad Company, Chicago Region Employees Timetable from October 26, 1986 for the line from Burlington, Iowa to Lawler Tower, which is just outside of Ottumwa. The Ottumwa station dates to 1951. It was built on the foundations of its predecessor, and the building is for sale or lease as we currently stand.
I actually have an update on that. The city of Ottumwa has purchased that building, just literally here in the last couple months.
Okay. It was still for sale in June.
Yep.
Yeah. Out front, CB&Q Hudson 3001 stands on display. The CB&Q Veterans Association building near the Ottumwa station. Extra 9264 West, coal empties for the Powder River Basin. The lead unit, the 9264, is an SD70 ACE, built in July 2008. BNSF 9979, the second unit, is an SD70 MAC, built in December 1998. Unusually, this train did not have a distributed power unit, or DPU, on the rear, just a Detroit Edison 990863, a 110-ton capacity hopper car. The lead unit of Extra 8570 West is an SD70 ACE, built between May and July 2014. The second unit was the 9550, an SD70 MAC, built as Burlington Northern set 9570 in January 1995. Unusually, this Powder River Basin train had hopper cars with bottom doors, but the car is also equipped for rotary dumping. The DPU on this train consisted of 2 units. Maybe they're making up for the last one, which didn't have one. The first was 9230, an SD70 ACE, built in May 2008. The second DP unit was the 9383, another SD70 ACE, built in February 2006. Over 8 hours late, Amtrak Train 6, the eastbound California Zephyr, arrives in Ottumwa. PTC issues would delay it for another half hour. With 2 unusually painted units, the train finally departs Ottumwa. Amtrak 184 in Phase 4 paint leads the train. The locomotive has serial number 53040 and was built in June 2001. Amtrak 157 is also a P42 DC, serial number 52822, and built in January 2001. Note the Heartland Flyers big game train lettering, which indicates this locomotive is usually assigned to trains in Oklahoma. Viewliner 2 baggage car 61064 follows the locomotives. It was built in Elmira, New York by Construcciones y Auxiliar de Ferrocarril, or something like that, in 2014.
Nice attempt. Good work on that.
Okay. Dormitory sleeper transition car 39044 follows the baggage car. This Superliner 2 car was built by Bombardier during 1996. Superliner 1 sleeper 32053 was built by Pullman Standard in 1981. Superliner 1 sleeper 3202 was built by Pullman Standard in 1980. Superliner 2 Diner 38043 was built by Bombardier during 1994. This is the 5th car in the train. Superliner 2 Sightseer Lounge 33028 is coupled to the diner. It was built by Bombardier in 1994. Superliner 2 Coach 34137 was built by Bombardier during 1996. Superliner 1 Coach Baggage Car 31005 was built by Pullman Standard in 1980. It brings up the rear of the California Zephyr. Our train is 8.5 hours late. It is 4.5 hours more to Chicago from Ottumwa. The first Burlington and Missouri River train served Fairfield on September 1st, 1858. This former freight house dates into the 19th century and might be the original structure at this location. Built in 1912, this passenger station saved Fairfield until Amtrak Day, May 1st, 1971, when the eastbound Burlington Northern California Zephyr stopped here, the last passenger train to ever stop here. This grain elevator facility at Fairfield has a loop from the main line and can load 100-plus car unit grain trains. The Burlington and Missouri River built west from Burlington, Iowa, reaching the Skunk River Bridge at Rome, Iowa during 1857. The modern version of that bridge is basically located in the woods northeast of the community of Rome and is pretty inaccessible. So we're presenting a picture of the 3rd Street overpass in Rome instead. Yes, it is a gravel road, and instead of 14-foot clearances, it's only 12-foot 6. This building was the Mount Pleasant Station until 1912. It has been relocated and turned into a multiple dwelling. In other words, it's been cut into 2 apartments. The CB&Q erected this fine brick station in 1912 for both the main line and the Keokuk branch. Amtrak still uses it. The interior is rather nice. I was out of position when this merchandise train came into view, but I shot anyway. Out of position in terms of the lighting. The lead unit with a clean cigar band stripe was 4597, which is a model C449W, which was built in November 1999. The second unit was a 6613, an ES44C4, built in March 2009. The third unit was 7799, an ES44DC, built in August 2005. The fourth unit was the 1842, an SD40-2, built in November 1873, and it's an ex-Burlington Northern unit numbered 6918. The fifth unit was the 2626, a GP39-3, built in November 1965 as a GP35 for the Toledo, Peoria, and Western. This locomotive was built as Toledo, Peoria, and Western 900, a GP35, which was sold to Larry's Truck and Electric as their 2626, sold to the Burlington Northern Santa Fe as their 2626, an upgraded GP35U, finally rebuilt by the BNSF to GP39-3 specifications. The sixth unit was Helms Leasing HLCX 1065, now a GP38-2. HLCX 1065 was built for the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas as their 224 in November 1969. This locomotive became Union Pacific 593 as a result of a merger. The Union Pacific downrated the unit to a GP38-2, renumbering it to 1065. It was retired and sold to Helm Leasing as a part of their fleet. Greenbrier Management Services, LLC, reporting marks AOKX 202592. A covered hopper was the last car on this mixed merchandise train. Running about an hour late, Train 6, the eastbound California Zephyr, stops at Mount Pleasant. Amtrak 27, a P42 DC, is the lead unit, built in November 1996. The eastbound California Zephyr, about 1 hour to Burlington, Iowa, and about 5 hours to Chicago. BNSF 9175 and 5792 lead a train of coal empties through Mount Pleasant, west through Mount Pleasant. The lead unit 9175 and SD70 ACE, built in February 2008. Second unit 5792 is an ES44AC, was built in September 2005. The consist of this train is Peoria Power and Light rotary coal dump gondolas. The distributed power unit comes into view. The DPU is Burlington Northern Santa Fe 5833, an ES44AC, built in November 2005. As we leave Mount Pleasant, let's remember it is home to both the Midwest Central Railroad and the Midwest Electric Railroad, located on the grounds of the Midwest Old Threshers. And here's the Midwest Electric Railway. I don't think I've ever heard a more mournful whistle.
Yeah, that one does sound kind of like a lonely moose out there.
Yeah. And of course, we have Steve Trackett because it's the Midwest Old Dresser. Back to the BNSF, east of New London at the 145th Avenue grade crossing. The head-end power block on this Powder River coal train was ES44AC 5920, followed by 9268 and SD70 ACE. And here we are, they're going by us at 145th Street. The consist of this train was BNSF coal hopper cars. The DPU was BNSF 6788 and ES44C4, built in September 2011. A view of the now closed West Burlington shops, once the main shops of the CB&Q. The West Burlington shops were in service from 1916 until 2004. One of their most famous alumni was Class S4A 464-4000, a streamlined steam locomotive named Aeolus, which was backup power for the diesel-hauled Zephyr fleet from 1936 until 1942. Yes, it was officially named Aeolus, but those in the know called it Big Alice Lagoon.
Yes.
Shorn of its name and streamlining during 1942, Big Alice now lives in a La Crosse, Wisconsin park. Amtrak Train 6, the eastbound California Zephyr, approaching the station in Burlington just 3 minutes late. Amtrak 148 leading the train is a P42DC built in June 2001. The rear of the California Zephyr on the last curve and grade crossing into the Burlington station. As we said before, the CB&Q built the Burlington station during 1943 to replace a building lost to a fire. The unit grain train pauses at Burlington to change crews before heading down the K line towards St. Louis. This unit grain train was led by BNSF 5036 and Norfolk Southern 9439. BNSF 5036 is a C44-9W built in July 2004. The second unit was Norfolk Southern 9439, a C49W built in March 2000. In the consist was BNSF covered hopper 476669, which carried an early logo of the railroad.
The wagon wheel logo.
Yes. The current swoosh logo on covered hopper 497045. Also in the consist was this covered grain hopper from the Little Crab Orchard and Egyptian Railroad in Illinois. The DPU is Burlington Northern Santa Fe 7815 and ES44DC, built in March 2010. Station work done, Amtrak 6, the California Zephyr departs Burlington. Sort of a nice view of the entire train there.
It is.
That should have dynamited that light pole stanchion, though. But I think they frown on things like that in Burlington. Power block, the 148 and the 179 are now past the photographer. The California Zephyr, or CZ, threading the Burlington Yard, lounge car in the center of the image, diner ahead of it. The coach baggage car on the rear of this Zephyr. Amtrak's eastbound California Zephyr crossing the Mississippi River. We just got a sequence here of pictures sitting back and forth with two lens settings.
Yep.
And here's the entire train spread out on the bridge. And the tail end of it.
Were you getting rained on when you took those photos too?
Yeah, I was getting rained on.
It looked like it.
Yeah. The Burlington Junction Railway provides overhead switching services at Burlington, Mount Pleasant, and Ottumwa in the area we've been exploring. Let's start in Burlington. Now, I'm not sure what this locomotive belongs to. It's owned by the Diesel Motive Company, based by the BUGX reporting marks. It was also Cargill 100 for a while. It was sitting in the Burlington yard. It's an old SD-9 off the Southern Pacific, which they transferred to the Northwestern Pacific. It was in the same spot in both March and June 2002. Further information would be more than welcome.
That locomotive hasn't moved for a little while, and I don't think that it's functional at the moment.
Like I said, more information would be welcome. The Burlington Junction operates about 4 miles of former Rock Island trackage to this Bluff Avenue terminal north of the Burlington Station area. Alco C415 number 701 is the usual Burlington Yard switcher. And coming from Long Island, which for many years had an all Alco roster for their road fleet, it was wonderful to hear this Alco locomotive turning over.
That is that locomotive is a pretty rare bird anymore.
Absolutely. This unnumbered General Electric 25-ton diesel switches the covered hopper unloading facility here. Anyone got a serial or a number? I'd be glad to receive it. The switch from the BNSF to the Burlington Junction at Mount Pleasant near milepost 232. Burlington Junction Yard in Mount Pleasant looking south. Basically, these are plastic pellet cars. The Burlington Junction Railroad switches a plastic extrusion factory here. The Burlington Junction switcher in Mount Pleasant. The day I was there was the day after they finished painting it. And in fact, standing to my left is a woman who was there to finish the painting. It's freshly painted, unnumbered, and unlettered RS4TC from Baldwin, Lima, Hamilton. Again, if anyone's got a number and a serial number and a builder's date, I'd love to hear from you.
She didn't tell you what number she was going to stencil on it?
It wasn't her job. She wasn't a sign painter. She was there. She was there to, you see the blue tape there?
Yeah.
She was there to remove stuff like the blue tape and inspect it and, if anything needed a patch or something to make sure everything was good.
Understood.
She wasn't the person to doing the lettering. And she was a little freaky about me being there, so I wasn't about to ask her to let me into the cab to look at the blue card.
Yeah.
Locked up in a tumba. Remember that Quonset hut-looking building I showed earlier? That would be out of picture to the right. This is Burlington Junction 714, an upgraded GP7U built in October 50 as Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe 2658. And the Fort Madison, Farmington, and Western Donaldson Station. What? You've never heard of the Fort Madison, Farmington, and Western? Well, that was a planned tourist operation, apparently based on the former CB&Q trackage between Fort Madison and Bloomfield via Donaldson, which was abandoned on September 22nd, 1968. For those CB&Q aficionados, it's the old Centerville Division, or part of the old Centerville Division. It's the early evening of September 1st, 2021. We're standing in the Mount Pleasant, Iowa station. Amtrak Train 7 is running a half hour late. It was delayed coming into Burlington due to river traffic keeping the bridge open for an extended period. Amtrak Train 7 arriving in Mount Pleasant behind the 817, originally at P40 DC and 76 at P42 DC. The setting sun glints off of two Superliner 2 coaches, the 34041 and the 34057. As the 34057 disappears into the sunset, let's say goodbye to Iowa. All images save the rail maps of Iowa, the image of CB&Q 4000, and the image of the Minneapolis and St. Louis FTs, copyright 2019, 2021, or 2022 by Edward M. Kohler Jr. All videos, copyright 2019 by Edward M. Kohler Jr. Text copyrighted 2022 by Edward M. Kohler Jr. Thank you for viewing this presentation. If you have any questions, comments, or constructive criticisms, send them to Edward M. Koehler at nyc.rr.com. A handout is also available by request from that address. And that's the end of the show. I had an alternate ending at one point, but I thought it was too hokey.
All right. Well, Ed, thank you for the presentation. Definitely appreciate it. And I just have one other question to ask you. When you came out to Old Threshers at Mount Pleasant, did you come out via Amtrak?
No, unfortunately, I didn't have the time to take the train ride.
All right. Well, that's fair.
I had to. Let's see. For the 2 times I came to the Threshers reunion, I flew to Iowa, which is a challenge from New York City.
Yeah.
And when I was there in March and June, I drove.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation, and I am going to call this a program. This presentation of the Iowa chapter has been brought to you by Steel Highway. Search for Steel Highway rail cams on YouTube, or go to steel-highway.com and order your copy of the magazine that every rail fan needs. Steel Highway, the magazine for the modern rail fan.